The 2023 NFL season is in the books, which means we have the official top 18 NFL draft order. So we figured we'd bring you guys a first round 2024 NFL mock draft with trades. We're going to be going back and forth. I'll handle the odds. Danny will handle the evens, and we'll give kind of like our way too early projections for what we think will happen in the 2024 NFL draft. This video is, of course, for fun, but a lot of people get, hot and bothered about, your team's pick, and we would never draft this player and all that kind of stuff. Just take a chill pill, just relax a little bit. We're happy to have some discussion in the comments. Let us know your thoughts on your favorite team, and we'll go back and forth on that. So before we get into it, Danny, how you doing?
Doing well. And yeah, like you kind of mentioned, the regular season just finished yesterday. Both of our teams are entering a fierce playoff battle. It's going to be a lot of fun going forward. Saturday, Sunday, and Monday. Your team playing obviously on Monday night. It's going to be a ton of fun. But we do have the top 18 picks, the non-playoff teams already decided, as well as the rest of the order being basically drawn up by PFF. So we'll have some fun. I'll be handling the evens, Corey handling the odds. So let's just get right into it.
Alrighty, so we are doing this based on what we think will happen. This is not what we would do necessarily. So again, if you have any insight about your favorite team, feel free to drop it in the comments below. Maybe they gravitate towards a certain position. Maybe you've heard some things, that kind of stuff we always like to talk about. So I am starting with the odds, which means that I have the first overall pick with the Chicago Bears. The age-old debate, and I'm low-key already sick of it because we've been talking about it already, is do you keep Justin Fields or do you take the rookie contract, reset the market there, and grab a guy like Caleb Williams or Drake Maye or something? Again, this is what we think will happen. What I think will happen is that the Chicago Bears are going to keep Justin Fields. Should they do that? That's definitely up for debate. I think that they will keep Justin Fields. So what I'm going to do is open this pick up to the market. Does anybody want to come up and get Caleb Williams? At 3 overall, we have the New England Patriots. At 8 overall, with the Atlanta Falcons there. Maybe want to just do a pick swap from 1 and 2 because, the Commanders want to bring home the hometown kid, Caleb Williams. I have an offer myself for the Patriots. Are you at number 2 with the Commanders? Are you wanting to make a swap?
I think at the Commanders at number 2, they're more willing to sit and pick because the top 2 quarterbacks at the top, which you guys will see in a second, are relatively similar. So I think the Commanders stick and pick at number 2, happy with whatever quarterback falls.
Okay, so I'm going to make a trade here with the Patriots then because the Patriots want to come up to number 1 and hop the Commanders and get their preferred quarterback of choice. I think, trade package-wise, we're looking at the first overall pick for the 3rd overall pick. I think 34 in a first-rounder is probably equivalent value. Obviously, great news if you guys are of the opinion that you should keep Justin Fields and build around him and trade down from number 1 overall because you got to figure Patriots trading up for a quarterback. Commanders are going to take a quarterback. You still get Marvin Harrison at number 3 overall, and you pocket 34 in this case and another future first. Again, trade package isn't really all that important. We could kind of debate that. This is just a first-round mock draft, so we're not going to actually get to use those picks. But I think any Bears fan that is very happy with Justin Fields would be ecstatic with this kind of return. So first overall pick, we're making a Caleb Williams quarterback out of USC. We know what he can do well. We've broken it down a number of different times. The ceiling projection is that he's, a Patrick Mahomes light. And I think even on a floor projection wise, you're looking at kind of what a Dak Prescott can do, maybe a more out of structure version, bigger version of like a Kyler Murray, for example. Yeah. We know he can make all the throws. We know he's athletic enough. There's been some questions about, his character, his work ethic, his attitude, all that kind of stuff. I don't know the guy. I'm not going to speculate on that kind of stuff. What I do know about him is that he won a Heisman Trophy as a true sophomore, and he's been outstanding on film, especially in 2022. He had a little bit more of a down season this year, but it was a horrible defense, horrible situation. So I'm going Caleb Williams, number 1 overall.
Yeah, the outer structure stuff really leaps off the page throughout the season, throughout the last couple years. He's been the top player in college football for a reason, and I do think first overall, where he should be able to find his way off the board, like you kind of picked him at. So we're at number 2 here. Like I mentioned, 2-horse race at the top for me. Going to keep it brief. This is my quarterback 1B in this class. I really think him and Caleb Williams are this neck and neck, but I'm going to lean towards Drake Maye here. I think if you're Washington, you need a quarterback. Sam Howell, yes, he has some, deep ball ability. He's been able to spread the ball, but the turnovers, the inability to keep himself clean takes a lot of sacks. I think the Washington Commanders at this point, they tanked all the way to number 2 overall. They're going to have a fresh infrastructure, arguably a new head coach, new offensive system in place. you want your young rookie quarterback to be able to build around. 4 years of team control, 5th-year option. I think Drake Maye is a good enough quarterback to be able to build around. Not to mention, I mean, that's a very good nucleus to have for a young rookie quarterback. You have Terry McLaurin on the outside. You have Curtis Samuel. You have Jahan Dotson. You have, other draft capital to be able to add, maybe a tight end, maybe offensive line help. There's a lot of pieces in play where Drake Maye isn't in a Bryce Young situation where he has to do it all by himself in year one.
Yeah, the challenging thing is the offensive line. I think in a neutral situation, it makes probably more sense to take an offensive lineman here, but you don't let good quarterbacks stop you from drafting a potential franchise quarterback. And as much as I like Sam Howell, based on what we know about him, he hasn't done enough to make you think that he's a franchise quarterback. He's done some things, and he's, kind of had like a Gardner Minshew-esque career so far, but that's maybe the ceiling projection for Sam Howell. I don't know if we're looking for a franchise quarterback, top 15 quarterback in the NFL. I think he's a good quarterback, but you don't let him stop you from taking Drake Maye. So even though the offensive line's a issue, you probably can make some moves in free agency to shore that up a little bit.
Hey, Ryan Fitzpatrick is not stopping you from taking Justin Herbert is basically the way I view this.
Yeah, and Drake Maye is exactly that type of projection. Big, strong arm, smart, makes good decisions, also has some out of structure ability some athleticism to boot. So definitely a great prospect. We believe that, it's not outrageous to say that he's a better prospect than Caleb Williams. They're 1A, 1B for us. It's all kind of depending on your offense and your flair and your style there. So I'm going to go with Marvin Harrison Jr. to the Chicago Bears here, take the generational transcendent wide receiver prospect to go along with DJ Moore. And now suddenly the Justin Fields, we should keep him truthers are very happy because you're cooking with gas with these two wide receivers. You have, a solid little tree or duo of running backs long-term with Khalil Herbert and Roschon Johnson. Maybe add another guy on day 3 to that group. You could probably stand to add some other offensive help as well on the offensive line, but your line has been pretty decent, especially recently. You have Cole Kmet as a solid tight end. Maybe grab a third receiver later on in the draft or in free agency. And Justin Fields is very well set up to potentially have a breakout season next year. And in this scenario, again, I'm expecting this is what Chicago will do. Should they do it? We can debate that. Maybe they should reset and go with Caleb Williams, but I think Bears fans are on this same page. I think the team has rallied around Justin Fields, and I think that Ryan Poles will probably give him another year. And that's just what I think will happen.
Yeah, it's really a coin flip at this point. I personally do still think they take a quarterback, but at the same time, like, as you guys can see, either scenario they pick, they can't really go wrong. Either you end up with Caleb Williams and you reset that quarterback contract, or you just, give Marvin Harrison Jr. to Justin Fields on what should be one of the best improved offenses in the league and arguably a playoff team in 2024. So either way you slice it, you got this pick for trading down from 1 to 9 last year. You basically just profited a number 1 pick from the worst team in the league with the Carolina Panthers. You're in a good spot, but we're at number 4 overall. Obviously, Cardinals fans, heart ripped out of their chest. Marvin Harrison Jr. going to pick before. Don't fret. This wide receiver is just as close to Marvin Harrison Jr. Malik Neighbors is an absolute superstar. I do think the after the catch ability, the separation ability, the dog factor, everything that he has on his plate as a prospect is evident. I do think this is a Brandon Ayuk clone. Marquise Brown is a very good number 2 wide receiver. Trey McBride, your number 1 tight end. Get a true alpha number 1 wide receiver, and I think the Cardinals offense can be a ton of fun in 2024 with the full season of Kyler Murray.
Yeah, I think a lot of people have comped him to DJ Moore. Some people say, because he goes to LSU, he's got a little bit of Jamar Chase to his game. He's a fun prospect, man, and I think he'd be really explosive in this offense as well. So yeah, Malik Neighbors makes a lot of sense. As you guys are going to notice probably early on in this is a very offensive heavy draft. So if you guys have not gotten into the NFL draft cycle, you have no idea what prospects are good. You've never heard of a lot of these guys. Again, the class this year, unlike last year and a couple of the recent years, there's not a Myles Garrett level edge prospect. There's not a, Sauce Gardner level cornerback prospect. It's mainly like, a lot of good offensive tackles, a lot of good wide receivers, a couple good quarterbacks, and, some a decent edge class depth wise, but maybe not quite the overall top end talent that we've seen in recent years. So the Chargers are on the clock here. And I think there's a number of different directions they could go. You can maybe make the argument that they invest in the offensive line, but they have Rashawn Slater at left tackle. You don't really want to be drafting like guards and right tackles necessarily this high in the draft. I think that they would go with a pass catching weapon because you can't let the sunk cost fallacy kind of like eat into your mind that, we spent a first round pick on Quentin Johnston last year. We don't want to draft another wide receiver. We don't want to draft another weapon for Justin Herbert because the reality is we don't know who the coach is going to be of this team. Maybe it's Ben Johnson. Maybe it's some of these other coaching candidates that could come in, a Dave Canales, maybe Bill Belichick is somebody that would come over to this team. What I want to do is get Justin Herbert set up in the long term to have some great offensive weaponry around him. And there's a guy on the board that has been comped to Keenan Allen in the past by a lot of people that I'm going to pick, and that's Rome Odunze from Washington. Big, physical, strong, got a lot better this year at the catch point, especially. And both his brother and cousin and father were pretty quick to point that out to me on Twitter that he got a lot better in that area. So, I mean, Rome Odunze, as much as I express some concern with him, I do see what he can become in the NFL. My comp for him was like a more athletic version of Michael Pittman Jr. And Michael Pittman Jr. has been like a Pro Bowl wide receiver this year. So definitely a upgrade for Justin Herbert's weaponry in the long term. And it also does help take some of the pressure off of Quentin Johnston to develop into a number one receiver. He can, develop, if he can, into like a number two or a number, 3 wide receiver instead of having to be the alpha long term for Justin Herbert. I think Odunze comes in, he can be a solid, we're a fantasy channel, he can be a PPR stud in an offense that we expect to probably throw the ball no matter what. Whoever they hire as a coach, they should probably be throwing a lot with Justin Herbert.
Yeah, no, real talk. If we're looking at this order right now, 3 wide receivers, 2 quarterbacks, I think these are all needle-moving type of assets for their respective offenses. Like you mentioned with the Rome Odunze, very physical wide receiver. But the thing that I love about him is people might point to the fact, oh, he's an older wide receiver. Well, in terms of pure age, he's not that much older than some of these other prospects. Obviously, he's a year older in terms of progression, in terms of university. But at the same time, like in pure age, he's still less than 23 years old. His understanding of the field is what really gets to you. Him and Penix are always on the same page. It's kind of like, for example, what the Dak CD connection has really developed into, where they're all both on the same page. They're both so smart at occupying space, finding holes in the defense. You really see that with Odunze and Penix. Odunze knows the soft spots. He knows defender leverage, and he's able to settle down when he needs to. And that's the mark of a pro-ready type of wide receiver. You work him in with Keenan Allen in year one, maybe potentially takes that Keenan Allen role once Keenan Allen eventually moves on, whether that's in 2024 or 2025, and you're set up for a yearly wide receiver one with Rome Odunze. I really do think that's the case. I think he's a clear-cut top 10, top 15 overall player in this draft. And if you're the Chargers and you have Justin Herbert, you need to surround him with a true number one weapon moving forward. You mentioned with Quentin Johnston, hasn't really worked out. Mike Williams coming off the torn ACL. Keenan Allen obviously older with his own injury concerns. You need that long-term pass catcher one. And like you said, Rome Odunze is that guy. But we move on to number 6. And you could have made the argument that the Giants would also want another pass catcher here, whether that was a Rome Odunze, Malik Neighbors, or Marvin Harrison Jr. But because all those 3 wide receivers are off the board, I think you solidify the offensive line. Daniel Jones, Tyrod Taylor, Tommy DeVito, all scrambling for their lives this year. Offensive line was a mess for the Giants. Evan Neal hasn't quite lived up to the expectation we could have expected. I think you go with a guy like Olu Fashanu. You can make the argument that Joe Alt's a little bit more pro-ready, but at the same time, Olu Fashanu, what he has in terms of traits, in terms of hip bend, in terms of just raw strength, he's such a young, fun player. And I think if you're the Giants, you have to swing for the fences. You have to swing for that upside. And I think Olu Fashanu is a clear top 10 overall player in this class.
Yeah, I think you could definitely make the argument the Giants would probably trade down in that scenario because there's not a whole lot of guys. Like, I think they need pass catching help, like in the worst way. Like, I really do think that is their biggest need, glaringly. Like, Wan'Dale Robinson's a fun player. You took Jalen Hyatt in the 3rd round. Darren Waller's an older tight end. Like, you need an alpha, dude. And this is the worst case scenario for them, that all 3 of those wide receivers are off the board and they have to go with an offensive lineman. Again, do you want to go with a guy that's, projects to be like a ceiling play? Because that's kind of what Evan Neal was coming out of Alabama, too. He wasn't the refined offensive line prospect, say Andrew Thomas, who's your left tackle, is on the other side of him. So, again, I think maybe Giants fans would have a problem with this pick. Like, hey, we should just trade down, or hey, you maybe take Brock Bowers or something like that. I don't know. For me, I don't really agree with this pick. I don't think that drafting a right tackle when you should have a guy that develops into a right tackle long-term should be better. But again, Giants fans are going to know better than me how bad Evan Neal has been. And if he has the capability to even, slide inside to guard, you need a tackle to help protect Daniel Jones or whoever's going to play quarterback for you. And you also could make the argument that Jayden Daniels is the right pick here at number 6.
Yeah, you can make the case with Jayden Daniels. Again, we'll see how that ends up materializing. I think for the purpose of now, you still have Daniel Jones one more year. Maybe you give him that chance coming off the ACL. I just think better protection has to be in place. Like we saw it, for example, in both the games against the Cowboys. We saw it against the games against the Eagles. There's a lot of really good trench play in the NFC East, especially on the defensive line side. You need to have a fighting chance, and the Giants simply did not have a fighting chance this year. Plug and play a guy like Olu Fashanu, who should be a day 1 starter. I think that's a right pick at number 6.
Yeah, I don't totally disagree with that for sure. So I'm on the board with the Tennessee Titans. Definitely a ton of stuff that they could do on the offensive line. I would make the argument, I know PFF would agree, they had the worst offensive line in the NFL 2 straight years in pass protection. So they need help in the worst way. Andre Dillard is their starting left tackle right now, which was a cast off from Philadelphia after he kind of flamed out over there at tackle and guard. So for me, this is a pretty easy. We're going to take Joe Alt. We're going to protect Will Levis. Not great pass catching weapons in this offense, and I would have loved to add a pass catching weapon. But at this point in the draft, there's a ton of wide receivers that can help you out in the second and the third round. A couple big name free agents as well, Pittman, T. Higgins, some of those guys to add to the Tennessee Titans pass catching core. So we also don't know, is Mike Vrabel staying here? Like we have no idea what kind of the leadership in Tennessee is. But for me, the easiest thing is help your young quarterback, get him some help on the offensive line. Took Skoronski last year. I think he's probably been their best offensive lineman, even as a rookie, which says a lot about the rest of their offensive line. So let's get Joe Alt in there at left tackle.
Yeah, two potential, key, true franchise level offensive linemen. You have your potential franchise quarterback there. Obviously, got hurt at some point this year. You don't want that to be a repeat case. Joe Alt, refined player, plug him in at left tackle. Worry about that. Don't worry about that spot for the next 10 years. So I like that. You get Joe Alt there. Number 8 overall. You can go a couple of different directions. How ironic would be, Brock Bowers. All jokes aside, people are going to talk about if this were the case, Brock Bowers, because of what happened with Kyle Pitts. But if this were to happen, and the Falcons were picking at 8 overall, and Jayden Daniels fell to them, I don't think they pass on it, especially in this scenario with, for example, a guy like Justin Fields maybe not being available to trade because he's obviously with the Chicago Bears in this draft scenario. If you're the Falcons, you can't go after a guy like Justin Fields. You're probably not going to go after another vet quarterback. Reset that rookie clock. Get Jayden Daniels in there. Would be a ton of fun. Good offensive line, ample weapons on the outside. And I'll tell you what, if Jayden Daniels went at 8th overall in your dynasty rookie drafts, guess what? The value of those picks is going to go up.
Yeah. They're in a really challenging spot because you're not high enough to get a guaranteed locked and loaded Caleb Williams or Drake May unless you make a Bryce Young-esque trade from last year. But you're also like, are you a competitive enough team to just go and sign Kirk Cousins and ready to boot it up? Like, I think that would be the best news. Like signing a Kirk Cousins type would probably be the best news for Drake London and for Kyle Pitts and Bijan Robinson, because then he's got a locked and loaded starter. This way you have to kind of worry about a rookie quarterback developing, and it probably stunts their development a little bit even with Arthur Smith being fired as of this taping. He just was fired last night. So we don't really know the situation. We don't know who's going to be the coach. We don't know exactly what they would gravitate towards. But what I do know about the Atlanta Falcons is that they need a quarterback of some kind. They cannot go into next year with anybody resembling Desmond Ridder or Taylor Heineke. And like even signing a Jacoby Brissett, I don't think would be good enough. Like you need a guy. Like you're going to sign Kirk Cousins or Russell Wilson or trade for somebody like that. Fine. But you probably still need to invest at some point in the draft in a young quarterback because you don't really have a long-term future there. So Jayden Daniels, definitely like that pick. I'm back on the board with the Bears again. And the Bears already selected Marvin Harrison in this situation. There's a number of different directions you could go. Can you just scroll down the draft order just a little bit more? I'm just curious if anybody, the draft order, not the actual board. I want to see if anybody would be interested in climbing up for Brock Bowers here, because I do think he's the best available player on the board right now. And I do think there's a number of teams that could be interested. The Indianapolis Colts are going to make a trade and come up for Brock Bowers. I think they could use another weapon for Anthony Richardson, and Bowers makes a whole lot of sense for Shane Steichen. We know what he's done kind of in Philadelphia with the tight ends that they had there. I think it would probably only cost them 15 and 46 to move up this far. Maybe they'd have to throw in like a 4th in 2025 or something like that just to get it done. But I actually like this deal. I want to come up. I know it's a tight end. Maybe Colts fans hate this, and they're like, oh, we drafted. We have Pittman. We have Josh Downs, who's been a good player. But you have a young quarterback, and your offensive line is pretty solid already. And your number one goal for Shane Steichen and for the front office is to make sure Anthony Richardson makes you look good. And Anthony Richardson will look a lot better with a guy like Brock Bowers as his tight end. The Colts kind of low-key know how to use tight ends pretty well. They just don't have a solidified guy there. They use Mo Alley Cox sometimes. They use Kylan Granson sometimes. They use a bunch of dudes. Brock Bauer is the dude. He would be your number one tight end, no question. So I actually kind of like this as a trade-up for them, and I also think the Bears, I mean, they're in pick collecting mode right now, so they might as well just keep doing it.
Yeah, no, I agree with that analysis. And not to mention, I mean, you invested in a guy like Jelani Woods a couple years ago, but he clearly hasn't panned out. And like I mentioned with Sam Howell, having Jonnu Smith is not going to keep you from selecting George Kittle, is basically how it's summed up here. You have Jelani Woods. He hasn't worked out, man. Brock Bowers at this point, get an offensive nucleus, get another elite pass catcher for Anthony Richardson. You need him to develop, like you said. I really like that fit for him. Now we're on the clock here with the Jets and probably got their hearts ripped out with Brock Bowers going off the board and with the 2 top tackles going off the board. I don't think they panic, though. I think you got a guy like Talise Fuaga who you can plug and play on that offensive line. Aaron Rodgers towards Achilles. We know the reason why. The offensive line just was not good enough to start the season. They did not add enough at tackle, and I think adding a young upside piece like Fuaga would really help that offensive line situation. You need to protect Aaron Rodgers. He's your only path towards potentially winning a Super Bowl.
Yeah, the Jets' plan was we're going to have horrible coaching with Nathaniel Hackett. We're going to have no receivers behind Garrett Wilson, and we're just going to trust Aaron Rodgers to make everything okay. It's going to be 17, 20, and Aaron Rodgers. It's Breece Hall, Garrett Wilson, and Aaron Rodgers. That's all we got. We have no offensive line. We don't call plays particularly well. We don't do anything other than just rely on Aaron Rodgers, and that can't be the plan going forward. You, need a better backup because Aaron Rodgers is older quarterback, but you also need to solidify your offensive line and the rest of your pass catchers. So at number 10, best available pass catcher or offensive lineman seems to be the reasonable thing, because you have a defense that is talented enough to win a Super Bowl if you had a good enough offense for it, and you do not currently. So protection or weapons, whatever falls to you at number 10, maybe you would consider trading up for a Malik Neighbors or consider trading up for somebody like that. But at this point, an offensive lineman falls to you, and I think they'd probably be pretty patient in that scenario as well. Now, this scenario, I am going to assume, this is my assumption when I'm making this pick, that Kirk Cousins is back with the Minnesota Vikings. I'm not going to take Michael Penix here. I'm not going to take, Bo Nix here, whatever. I'm going to assume that Kirk Cousins is back. So the quarterback position, no longer in need, in my opinion. I'm going to look to potentially solidify their defense, because I think they did a lot of good on defense this year, where Brian Flores came in and he was able to make one of the worst defenses in the NFL 2 years ago actually perform as one of the better defenses. For me, I'm going to just go best defensive player available, because I think your offense has a nice young nucleus with Jefferson and Addison and TJ Hawkinson. Probably need to address the running back position at some point, but maybe they do that in free agency. There's actually a number of good running backs available. So what I'm going to do here, they've been trying to move off of Danielle Hunter, it seems like, for a couple of years. And I believe the best edge in this class is Dallas Turner. So I'm going to take Dallas Turner here with this pick, and hope that, maybe they move off of Danielle Hunter. They cut him like post June 1, or maybe they trade him or something like that. Get a little bit of youth on the defensive line. Brian Flores is a defensive guy. He's typically invested in secondary players. So I almost went Kool-Aid McKinstry or somebody like that. But I think Dallas Turner makes a lot of sense for what they want to do.
Yeah, no, I dig that pick as well. Now we're at a point where in these next 2 picks in particular, even like next 3, depending on what happens with Derek Carr, you can make the case that any of these teams could take a quarterback. Now, the question is, which quarterback fits each of these teams respectively? I honestly think the best fit for the Broncos might be Bo Nix. Get an accurate passer there, obviously pairing with Sean Payton. I don't want to have the Drew Brees comps, but that's kind of what you're getting here. Smart signal caller, accurate, knows where to go with the football. And obviously for the Broncos, you need that franchise quarterback, obviously with the news of Russell Wilson getting benched and probably cut this offseason. So if they have their pick at the quarterback position, I understand Michael Penix would be the main guy for a lot of people here, but I do think the medicals may keep him out of the first round. I think it would come down to Bo Nix versus J.J. McCarthy. You can argue the outer structure play with J.J. McCarthy. You can argue the natural athleticism, but I do think Bo Nix really fits what Sean Payton wants to do on offense, so I'm going to have him here with the Denver Broncos.
Yeah, and this might seem high for Bo Nix in general, but I think once we get Bo Nix to the Senior Bowl and once we get him on whiteboards at the Combine and stuff, he's an older prospect. He's learned a lot. I mean, one thing that I can't discount from Bo Nix, because when we watched his, film, I wasn't expecting to like him at all. He's like a 4th or 5th year quarterback. He, was horrible at Auburn the first couple of years that I watched him, but he got so much better once he moved over to Oregon. It wasn't just this year too. It was also last year as well. So that progression shows an ability of a player who can work hard, who can take criticism, who's mentally tough, who can, work out his weaknesses and turn some of them into strengths, even because he was very inaccurate at Auburn, and he was the most accurate accurate. Completion percentage led all NCAA quarterbacks. Again, you can argue scheme. They check the ball down a lot. They throw a lot of horizontal passes, but he was also a very good deep passer to guys like Troy Franklin down the field. So I was very impressed with what I saw from Bo Nix, and I do think he will generate first-round buzz similar to what we saw with Will Levis. Now, Will Levis didn't actually go in the first round, but I do think that's kind of like the caliber of prospect we're talking about, where it wouldn't have shocked any of us if Will Levis went in the first round.
Yeah, I completely agree. And not to mention, like you kind of mentioned, him throwing the ball at or near the line of scrimmage. Well, guess what? When you're working with Sean Payton, he doesn't want you taking those risks. He doesn't want you putting the ball in harm's way. He wants his offense to be an efficient, chain by chain type of offense.
Yeah, for sure. So I'm on the board here with the Raiders, and they're super challenging because if you look at the contract that Jimmy Garoppolo signed, like it's not really easy to just like take Michael Penix here and just like move right into the Michael Penix era, because Jimmy Garoppolo signed a 3-year deal for like $72 million and a pretty decent amount of guarantees, like 33 of that guaranteed. And I don't think it's all like front loaded or anything like that. So, I mean, the Raiders are going to have a challenging time trying to fix the Josh McDaniels mistake and letting him take over everything and do whatever he wants. For me, I think when your franchise is in a state of flux like that and you don't exactly know what you're doing, it's probably better to not reach on a quarterback and try and turn him into a franchise guy and instead take a foundational player that can help your next regime. Or like, again, we have no idea who the coach is going to be, if it's going to be Antonio Pierce, if they're going to bring in somebody else. I believe Newton is probably the best defensive lineman on the board right now. So I'll take Jerson Newton and just kind of hope to build up the trenches there. You have Max Crosby. He's clearly a franchise caliber. He's the best player on your team, probably in general. So just get another piece on the defensive line. I might have gone offensive line there as well, but I didn't really see a guy that I was like 100% in on. So a lot of options for the Raiders. Again, wouldn't be shocked if they go with a quarterback in the first round. Wouldn't be shocked if they, try and replenish their pass catching group, if they trade away Devontae Adams or if they let Josh Jacobs walk. But for me, I'm just going to go with a safe, let's take a defensive lineman and hope he blossoms into a guy opposite Max Crosby.
For sure. No, I like that pick as well. The other, direction you could potentially point to is they are apparently well within the Jim Harbaugh talks. Apparently at this point, the Raiders, there was a report that came out today, I believe from Jordan Schultz, that they've narrowed down their search for a head coach to be between Jim Harbaugh and Antonio Pierce. Hypothetically, if they sign Jim Harbaugh, I can totally see this being a spot for even like JJ McCarthy. We've heard Jim Harbaugh's thoughts on JJ McCarthy in the past. He's very high on his talent. Obviously, they're in the national championship. That'd be a direction. But like you said, let's just assume it's Antonio Pierce. They go with a defensive lineman to really identify that defense as one of the better ascending units. I mean, this was a team that down the stretch was playing some physical ball, was playing some competitive ball, really gravitated towards Antonio Pierce versus what Josh McDaniels was. So adding a guy like Jerson Newton to really beef up that defensive line, pair him next to Max Crosby, I also like that fit. Now we're going on to arguably your most hated team in the NFL. Not even arguably, inarguably.
It's very easily my most hated team.
Most hated team in the NFL. And I think at this spot, if you're the New Orleans Saints, you can make a number. You can go in a number of different directions. The direction I go is getting a nice young offensive lineman to develop there with J.C. Latham. Was able to see him on display against my Michigan Wolverines. Big time block on that touchdown run by Jace McClellan. Really sealed that side. J.C. Latham, I mean, at the end of the day, trusting Alabama offensive linemen, especially ones that are as young, as athletic as J.C. Latham, is always a good bet at this point in the NFL draft. I do think that after the guys like Talis Fuaga, after the top two, you swing for the fences on a guy like J.C. Latham, who maybe isn't as polished as some of those other guys, but has a ton of upside given his athletic testing.
Yeah, for sure. And I think in this scenario, the Saints probably just hold Derek Carr. Like the quarterbacks haven't slid to them. Justin Fields wouldn't be available. Like there's not a whole lot of like Kirk Cousins, I already mentioned, wouldn't be available in this scenario either. And that's also not really that huge of an upgrade from Derek Carr. So I think they would probably roll with Carr one more year. And also similar to the Garoppolo situation, his contract, I'm not sure you can just like get out of it after one season. Like you're probably stuck with him for one more year. So I'm on the board with the Bears here. And I think, again, I've already done trade downs twice with this team, so I've collected a lot of picks. I think for them, the easiest thing to do for me would be, we already drafted a wide receiver. We've already addressed the offensive side of the ball. The offensive linemen have kind of come off the board. Do we want to go with an Amarius Mims? Do we want to, kind of pigeonhole ourselves into an offensive lineman? For me, Montez Sweat was the guy that made the big impact to your defense. Like once you traded for him, your defense kind of took the step forward that you needed them to do. So I think going with Jared Verse here or Latu, I don't really know too much about the edge prospects. I'll keep it 100 here, but I know that Latu is an athletic dude. I'm pretty sure
Oh,
he's the
yeah.
type of guy that would be similar to Montez Sweat. So with Jared Verse, maybe he gives you something a little bit different. You can correct me if I'm wrong on any of that stuff, but like the Bears are currently starting DeMarcus Walker opposite of Montez Sweat. So you could definitely use a running mate for Sweat long term.
Yeah, for sure. And the way I kind of look at this is Verse, maybe not the same ceiling as a guy like Latu. Latu having a little bit more medical red flags, given apparently a couple years ago he was potentially going to medically retire from the NFL. What's funny is it's a similar situation just a couple years ago with Jalen Phillips, right? Where people were arguing maybe he was the best edge rusher in the class, but had that medicals. And I mean, going even into this year, he was really one of the better edge rushers in the league. So at this point, 15th overall, knowing how good your defense was, adding a potential legit blue chip level talent, which is what Latu represents, I think that's the direction. So I do like that. I go with Laiatu Latu, aka you go with Laiatu Latu. But now we're back on the clock with the Seattle Seahawks. Says their biggest needs are on the offensive line. I think you can add, a potential guard talent here, whether that's, a Jackson Powers Johnson. I don't necessarily think they'd reach on a guy like that. Maybe they take a tackle with a better guard projection. Maybe a guy like Troy Fatuanu, maybe a guy like Graham Barton. You can go that direction, but I also think you can go the direction of an edge rusher. And we just mentioned the name Jared Verse. I don't necessarily think he's out of the discussion here. And to be honest, I think he will be the pick. I'll go with Jared Verse.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense there. We move on to Jacksonville here, and I think they have a number of different needs. Their secondary is one that kind of stands out to me as maybe something that could add some pieces, especially given the talent that's still available right now on the board. So I'm going to make this one easy. I'm just going to roll with Kool-Aid McKinstry. The Jags corners and the Jags secondary in general has kind of been useless the last month. Especially this kind of decline that we've seen from Trevor Lawrence in the offense has also kind of coincided with the defense not playing very well as well. And the Jags defense actually was out to a pretty good start to the season early on, and then they suffered some injuries. And I think part of the reason why they weren't able to kind of rebound is the fact that their defense is just kind of lacking blue chip talent. I think that McKinstry actually might be a blue chip player if he can develop in the NFL.
Yeah, I like that pick. Obviously, swung and missed a couple years ago on CJ Henderson. Get your true number one lockdown corner potentially for the future with Kool-Aid McKinstry. I like that fit almost as much as I like this fit. Now, I understand it doesn't say it's one of their biggest three needs, but T. Higgins is a free agent in March. We know that at this point, financially, you're going to need to lock up Jamar Chase long-term. Obviously, Joe Burrow on a big contract. I don't think T. Higgins is going to be back on the Bengals. A player that I think from a size perspective, from a movement perspective, can add that jolt to this offense. And funny enough, actually goes to the same school as Jamar Chase did. I love the fit of Brian Thomas going to the Bengals. You put him on the outside there, occupy that T. Higgins role. I think he's got a little bit more movement ability. Obviously, T. Higgins, great with the ball in the air, better than even what Brian Thomas represents. But I think from a frame standpoint, from a versatility standpoint, adding Brian Thomas to this offense, you don't need to rely upon him to be your wide receiver one because you have Jamar Chase. He can fill that auxiliary secondary type of role to this team. And we've seen him operate that just at LSU this year. Obviously, Malik Neighbors heard his name called earlier in this draft. I think Brian Thomas is the perfect Robin to Jamar Chase's Batman on this team. So I will take him here at 18th overall.
Yeah, and I think he also allows you to free up Jamar Chase to get more intermediate work done because currently Jamar Chase is the Bengals' deep threat. But Brian Thomas actually occupies that role better than T. Higgins does because T. Higgins is more of a possession receiver. So getting Brian Thomas to be the deep threat and get Jamar Chase more into that possession receiver role, let him work after the catch, and of course still do what he can do downfield. That makes some sense, I think, for the Bengals. And obviously, I personally don't think that they're going to keep T. Higgins. Maybe they re-sign him. Maybe they just franchise tag him and maybe try and deal him or something like that. But I think it makes more sense knowing the strength of this draft class, where the Bengals are picking. They should be in prime range for a Brian Thomas, or maybe they want to go in a different direction for an Emeka Egbuka or an Adonai Mitchell or a Keon Coleman or something like that. They could always go in a number of different directions. So for me, I'm looking at the Green Bay Packers on the board here. You got a very young offense that, honestly, I don't think you really need to add much to. Maybe a running back because Aaron Jones is getting a little bit older, but this isn't the type of draft that you're going to have a running back go 19th overall. So I'm going to actually solidify the offensive line here and go with Amarius Mims because you got such a great young talented group of pass catchers with Dontavian Wicks and Christian Watson and Jayden Reed and Romeo Dobbs and, you know, the tight ends, of course, Tucker Kraft and Luke Musgrave. So let's keep investing into our young offense and roll with a good offensive line prospect. They need big time help on defense. So some Packers fans might not be a fan of that pick, but there's still free agency. There's still other rounds of the draft. You can invest in the defense there.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. But we're back on the clock here, 20th overall. Your team, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I already know where you want to go because we've talked about this off camera before. I'll get your thoughts on it. Thinking about Cooper DeJean here to your Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Obviously, familiarity with the school over there with Iowa. What are your thoughts on that fit?
Yeah, I think Tampa's in a unique spot because I don't think they have like a pressing need. I don't think that you look at their team and you're like that you need this or you need that. Like you could go in a number of different directions for their team. Cooper DeJean, what I know about him is that he's very versatile. So he could potentially work in tandem with Antoine Winfield Jr., play in the box some, play at the nickel some, play outside corner some. You have high paid corners with Jamel Dean and with Carlton Davis. They haven't necessarily played to their contracts, but I don't think that the Bucs would necessarily want to move off of those guys because Todd Bowles isn't going anywhere. And of course, he's the one who developed them. So I think Cooper DeJean makes sense. I also think it makes sense if there's like a high quality edge rusher that falls to you because Joe Tryon-Shoyinka hasn't really developed. He was a first round pick for the Bucs the year that they won the Super Bowl. And you also have Yaya Diaby, who's been an absolute revelation, a third round pick that they took this year. Everybody's talking about, you know, Jalen Carter for defensive player of the year and Devin Witherspoon for defensive player or rookie of the year. Sorry. And the guy from the Rams, Byron or Kobe, what's his name? Kobe Durant?
Kobe Turner.
Sorry, Kobe Turner. Yeah. Everybody's talking about those guys for defensive rookie of the year, but quietly, Yaya Diaby's actually been very, very good for the Bucs and Kalijah Cansey on the interior, Vita Vea on the interior. I'm actually not going to go to the defensive line. What I'm going to do instead is something that I don't think the Bucs will do. Maybe I don't know. Maybe they could go in this direction. We have Mike Evans, a free agent. He's older. Chris Godwin is not quite the same guy he always was when he was before the ACL tear. So what I want to do, knowing how the Buccaneers want to run this offense, they're very much, you know, Dave Canales is their offensive coordinator, that Seattle like possession receiver type of mold, a guy that I think will be a huge riser throughout this entire offseason, who actually reminds me quite a bit of Chris Godwin, is Emeka Egbuka. I think once he goes to the combine, once he puts some athletic testing out there, clears some medicals, I think people will look at this dude and be like, dude, this guy legit had like a 25% target share alongside Marvin Harrison Jr. Like he was a fantastic prospect after his sophomore year. And he kind of gives me like B+ JSN vibes. And knowing that Dave Canales came from Seattle, who eventually drafted JSN, I think would actually make for a very good fit. Could go in a number of different directions. If you went receiver, you could go with an ancillary deep threat like Xavier Worthy, could go with a long-term Mike Evans replacement like an Adonai Mitchell or a Keon Coleman. But I actually like the idea of just getting a guy that plays on the outside right away, while you throw Godwin and him kind of interchangeably into the slot alongside Mike Evans.
Yeah, no, I dig the direction you went there. But we're back on the clock here, 21 overall, Arizona Cardinals. Another number of different directions. It's funny because obviously in the first pick, you got Malik Neighbors. Now this is, I believe, the Houston pick that they took over from the draft, the Will Anderson trade from last year. A number of different directions, like we kind of mentioned, we can go. We already got that number one weapon on the outside. You can look at the offensive line. There's a couple pieces like a Jordan Morgan, Troy Fatuanu that you can lean. You could also look to maybe upgrade the defensive line. A couple names that are still listed here that you would like. I understand like Chop Robinson's listed low. I think he will be a first-round pick, especially after he tests.
I like the secondary here for Arizona because they've been kind of decimated, and there's a lot of good corners and safeties on the board right now. That's probably the direction I would go.
Yeah, no, I dig that. I like Tyrion Arnold. We already had one Alabama corner go off the board with Kool-Aid. I think Tyrion Arnold added here. Obviously, Alabama's secondary was phenomenal this year. We were able to see it on display even in the Rose Bowl. Really took away Michigan's deep passing game. And I think that's a credit to Tyrion Arnold, to Kool-Aid McKinstry, really locking it down on the outside against Michigan. I'll let you choose, though. Which one do you like? Do you like Wiggins? Do you like DeJean? Do you like Tyrion Arnold? Ball's in your court.
Yeah, I mean, you already have a versatile guy like Budda Baker, so I probably wouldn't go with DeJean.
Yep,
I don't know a whole lot about Nate Wiggins, and admittedly, so I'm probably just roll with Tyrion Arnold because I know the most about him, and I know he can play because I've seen, you know, what Malik Neighbors was able to do. They had a couple battles at the catch point, and Tyrion Arnold actually got the best of him a couple times. So it'd be interesting that they would be teammates in this scenario.
Oh yeah, no, for sure. But we're on the clock here with the Rams. You can make the argument, okay, what's the health of Matthew Stafford going into the offseason? We're not going to explore the quarterback card here. Assuming Matthew Stafford's back, assuming he's healthy, like this is still a contending NFL team. So not going to go with the quarterback. You could also argue with the offensive line, but it was a much improved, better playing unit with the addition of Steve Avila, with the trade, I believe, of Dotson from the Steelers. Really a much improved offensive line compared to what they were the previous year. I'm going to lean towards the defense. You could look at a potential young corner to really build the foundation around there. And I think that's the direction I'm going to go. We just debated Terrion Arnold or Nate Wiggins. I think Nate Wiggins is too talented of a player to fall past the spot. And given the fact that the edge rush board really has decimated compared to what we could have potentially expected with Jared Verse coming off the board, with Laiatu Latu coming off the board, I think Nate Wiggins is the best pick here for them.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. The Steelers, they're kind of in a rock and a hard place right now with the quarterback position because, I mean, they're like outright benching Kenny Pickett for Mason Rudolph right now. So that doesn't speak very highly to Kenny Pickett just coming into next season and being the starter. So I don't know why quarterback isn't listed as a need right now, because to me, it absolutely should be. Because if you don't know if Kenny Pickett's good enough after 2 years where he's thrown like 7 touchdowns, it feels like the dude has not been good at all. And he has talented pass catchers. We know what George Pickens can do. We know what Deontay Johnson can do. We know Pat Freiermuth is a pretty solid tight end. I am going to take a quarterback here, and I'm going to go with Michael Penix because I think he makes sense for this offense. You need a playmaker, a distributor to get the guys that are good with the ball in their hands. So I don't know what Steelers fans would think about this, giving up on Kenny Pickett after 2 years for another overaged prospect with Michael Penix. This might not be something that you guys like, and maybe the Steelers fans will have me
comment down below.
Comments. But let me ask you this question before you say that: who are you starting quarterback right now? Like maybe they go with a Russell Wilson, or maybe they trade for a Jimmy Garoppolo or something like that. But that feels like a Band-Aid to me. Like, I don't know. Michael Penix is probably more talented than the 23rd pick in the draft. But the question will be like the medicals and that kind of stuff, which makes me think that this is about the range of the draft he might actually go because of that medical concern.
Yeah, no, I agree with that as well. I think you can make the case for a guy like JJ McCarthy, but because you have, the weapons on the outside, you really want to develop that passing game. I don't mind adding a more NFL ready type of arm with Michael Penix. So I like that fit there. We're back on the clock here with the Miami Dolphins, and you can go the defensive route. You can potentially shore up the offensive line. I'll take a look at the offensive line here. I think you have to add a guy that can play interior immediately. Connor Williams coming back from a torn ACL was their starting center. A little bit concerning there. Obviously, the offensive line interior has been their weakness on the offensive line with how good their tackles have played this year, with obviously Teron Armstead manning that left side. You could look at a guy like Troy Fatuano. You could look at a guy like Jordan Morgan. You could look at a guy like Graham Barton if you chose the offensive line direction. But I honestly think if you're at this point and a guy like Cooper DeJean is falling to you, you just kind of take best player available. And we've seen it from Miami in the past to take a best player available type of pick. Doesn't necessarily scream out as a strong need here, but adding another secondary option, you have Javon Holland, you have Jalen Ramsey on the team. Adding a guy like Cooper DeJean who can give you some nickel experience, who can play on the outside, who can give you some spurts at safety, really just being a versatile chess piece for Vic Fangio. I think I trust Vic Fangio in maximizing his role.
Yeah, that's definitely also seemed motivated by not letting the Philadelphia Eagles get Cooper DeJean for Danny here in this draft. That also
I didn't even notice they were picking.
Well, he would have been a run to the podium pick for Philadelphia for sure, because I think easily, I know it's not listed as the number one need. In my opinion, easily the biggest need for Philadelphia is secondary help. That I think
easy,
not debatable. But I do think that wide receiver would also be a reasonable need here. I don't think I'm going to do it. I think they could get a receiver later on in the draft. I don't think they would go with a receiver in the first round. So what I'm going to suggest is we just kind of go best corner available. They have gone to this school more times than any other team. So we're going to go with Kamari Lassiter, and we're going to take another Georgia defensive player. And to me, they just need help at secondary, man. Like James Bradbury, not been good this year. Darius Slay, not been good this year. Let's just get some corner help on this team.
Agreed. I like that fit for the Eagles there. And obviously, as you know, you mentioned the familiarity there with the University of Georgia, not to mention just his teammate last year, Kelly Ringo, already being on the team. Gonna have him fit in right away in that locker room. But we're back on the clock here with the Chiefs, and I think it's got to be a receiver at this point. Now, which receiver they end up going is the question mark here.
I got two good fits here. If I can chime in for a second.
Let's hear it.
So Rashee Rice is your physical power forward style of receiver. I don't know what they think of Sky Moore and Kadarius Toney and all these other slot. My point is they have a lot of slot options. So I don't want to go
Yes.
with a slot option either. What I
Agreed.
think they need is either a deep threat, which would make Troy Franklin and Xavier Worthy come into play here, or a guy that could develop into a true alpha number one wide receiver like an Adonai Mitchell or a Keon Coleman. My gut tells me the type of receiver that they would gravitate towards,
Keon
given that they
Coleman.
already have Rashee Rice, would be Troy Franklin or Xavier Worthy. So I would go with Franklin here if I was going with a wide receiver.
Because I mean, I like that fit too. Because basically, you're having him pegged into that Marquez Valdez-Scantling role, and obviously, we've seen from Marquez Valdez-Scantling,
He shouldn't be starting in the NFL at this point.
Yeah, so you get that deep threat, you get the length there with Troy Franklin, and you're just hoping he actually catches his deep passes that MVS has proven not to throughout the last couple of years. So, like that fit.
Yeah, I actually really like that fit as well. I think Xavier Worthy is the slightly better prospect, but I do think that the NFL is probably going to be a little concerned with Xavier Worthy's size, and that might make him fall to the early second round as opposed to going in the late first. But I could be wrong. Xavier Worthy is going to run the 4.2s probably at the combine. And once that happens, maybe they're like, okay, Xavier Worthy is a first round pick because can't teach speed. And that makes sense. And NFL teams definitely think that way. I'm on the board here with the Texans. I don't agree that wide receiver is their biggest need at all.
Agreed.
I think they have two absolute studs long-term with Nico Collins and Tank Dell. Sure, could they use some ancillary pieces? But I mean, they turned Noah Brown into like a reasonable dude this year. John Mechie is really his rookie season this year. Maybe he turns into something in the slot. So I'm not going to go with a wide receiver pick. I think they could use some help on the defensive line because I think they're starting like Jerry Hughes as their second edge right now, who's like 36 years old.
Well, they have John Grenard too. They have John Grenard.
Yeah, like they're a little bit older up front outside of Will Anderson. So I actually kind of like the idea of getting Will Anderson a running mate here. And let's go back to his school for an easy one here with Chris Braswell. Again, I don't know anything about this dude, but to me, it makes sense. They invested in Alabama defensive lineman last year, get him a running mate on the edge this year. I also considered going Jatavian Sanders from Texas because Dalton Schultz is on the franchise tag, and they've shown the propensity to kind of use that part of their offense with, of course, Bobby Slowick and D'Amico Ryans coming from that like 49ers type of scheme. You could go with the Jatavian Sanders, but I actually kind of like the idea of shoring up the defense a little bit.
Yeah, no, I think that's a proper direction as well. We're on the clock here now with the Detroit Lions. I did not mean to click that, and I'm definitely not going to go with Kalen King after he got massacred by Marvin Harrison Jr. You could look at a corner here, Rackestrood from Missouri. Quinyon Mitchell, I know a lot of people have been buzzing about him, has graded well on PFF these last couple of years. The only thing there is the small school nature of him. I don't necessarily know if he goes in the first round. You could look at potentially a safety. I know a guy like, I keep misclicking apparently, Cameron Kinchins, Tyler Nubin has gotten some first round buzz. It's tricky because, I mean, you got CJ Gardner-Johnson there. So I believe it was a 1-year deal though, right? CJ Gardner-Johnson signed.
Yeah, it was.
$9 million.
Okay, so I'm not up on all the defensive interior prospects right now because we're a fantasy channel. I don't really have time to fucking scout defensive interior guys. But I will say, a good fit for what Detroit likes to do are either of the two guys from Texas.
Yeah, no, for sure.
I don't know if those guys are necessarily considered first-round players or whatever, but I think Devondre Sweat and Byron Murphy are both good fits.
Yeah, they're a little bit lower here. I think like in this scenario, maybe you wait till the second round because it's a really good interior defensive line class. Taylor, Jenkins, obviously both Texas guys are going to be at the top of the board. I think he leans secondary still. I really like Tyler Nubin here. Versatile player, a lot of range. You can put him into that defense. And I mean, their secondary was a mess. We saw what CeeDee Lamb was able to do with them just last Saturday night, 13 catches, 227 yards. It's been a problem all year. And when you play against those top tier NFC offenses in the playoffs, you need a back end that can be able to compete. And Nubin really helps you to accomplish that.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I'm going to run to the podium on this pick because I think there's a guy that makes total sense for what the Buffalo Bills want to do. And I'm going back to the University of Texas, and I'm taking not Xavier Worthy because again, I'm doing this from a predictive standpoint. I think Xavier Worthy is the better prospect, but Adonai Mitchell, I believe the NFL will think is a better prospect. There's moments in Adonai Mitchell's tape where he looks like the good side of a George Pickens type of prospect, where he can elevate. You saw that catch that he had, the touchdown that he had in the Sugar Bowl against Washington, and they kept going back to him even when the game was on the line because they trust him in that kind of situation. But he's not just a jump ball receiver. Like, he's a fluid athlete for a 6'4" dude, and he can run routes decently well. The problem with him is, like, he looks like the best receiver in college football in some plays, and he looks like Marquez Valdez-Scantling on others. So you need to work on the consistency with him. Having a guy like Stephon Diggs opposite him would probably benefit him quite a bit because he could learn to run routes like a pro from one of the best route runners in the NFL. So I think Gabe Davis is a free agent. You don't really have anybody on the outside to go along with Stephon Diggs long term. I think the Bills would have been very much in on Jordan Addison or Zay Flowers had he fallen to them last year's draft, and they got all rattled off right before Buffalo's pick, and that's why they went with Kincaid. So for me, I think you invest in another offensive pass catcher here. You have a young nucleus of Adonai Mitchell and Dalton Kincaid. And then, of course, Stephon Diggs, the trusty veteran who should have another couple of years left in the tank. And this would obviously all depend on what happens in the playoffs this year. If they get outgunned in a shootout, maybe they're inclined to go for a guy like this. Some people might be inclined to go with defense for the Bills because they haven't, been the most consistent on that side of the ball, but they've also been like missing a lot of their best players on defense all year. Like Matt Milano's been out since like the Jacksonville game. Tre'Davious White suffered a major injury. The safeties have been banged up all year. So I'm going to go offense with Buffalo because I do think that that's their bread and butter. That's the thing that they need to keep investing in. And if they're going to lose Gabe Davis, then it makes sense to replace him with somebody better in Adonai Mitchell, a guy that can do what Gabe Davis does, but then actually bring a little bit more to the table. So I like Mitchell there.
Yeah, no, I really like that fit for them. Like you mentioned, could have gone with like a Keon Coleman as well. I think that'd be a good fit, but I do like AD Mitchell at that spot. But now with my team, the third last pick in the draft, aka the NFC Championship loser, which might be a little bit of a projection for what I could expect for them in the playoffs this year. I think the direction honestly has to be offensive tackle. Tyron Smith, a little bit old, over the shell at this point. A lot of injury concerns that he's shown in these last couple of years. Terrence Steele has not been the same player at right tackle this year since Solari took over. Came back from that ACL injury, was not the same tackle this year. I believe accounted for 30% of the offensive line pressures on the Cowboys. So I'm going to go with an offensive tackle that is actually going to be playing tonight. We're recording this on Monday prior to the national championship. I'm going with Troy Fatuanu of Washington. Obviously, a very, very good pass blocking offensive line with Washington. Michael Penix, the least sacked quarterback in the FBS. And his man on left tackle there, Troy Fatuanu, has been absolutely phenomenal helping that cause. Nasty offensive lineman, finishes his blocks. A lot of good reports here from a lot of the offensive line analysts in the Cowboys Twitter sphere. So I have a good word that Troy Fatuanu would be a very good fit with what the Cowboys want to do on the offensive line. Also gives you insurance. You're a playoff team. You are at this point with the Cowboys where if Tyron Smith tomorrow were to miss a playoff game, your odds of winning that game go down dramatically. Having insurance with a guy like Troy Fatuanu who can kick out to the left tackle. If Terrence Steele is struggling, guess what? You can plug him in at right tackle. If you want Tyler Smith to move to left tackle, if Tyron Smith got hurt, Troy Fatuanu can play left guard. He's just a versatile chess piece that can fill a number of roles on this offensive line. And that's really what the Cowboys need if they want that sustained deep playoff run.
Yeah, that makes some sense. I'm going to have fun with this pick. Even though we said this is what we would, if we wouldn't, this is not what we would do. I'm having fun with this one because I love this fit. So the 49ers, what is their strength? Offensive firepower, right? Everybody knows that. That's what their strength is. Brock Purdy has the easiest job in the world. Everybody that hates Brock Purdy talks about this all the time. Brandon Ayuk is up for a contract extension. Deebo Samuel, we know what area of the field he operates in. It's the short to intermediate area. George Kittle, he's a seam buster of a tight end, but technically he is their deep threat on this offense. So what I'm going to do is whether they sign Brandon Ayuk to an extension or not, I'm giving him some speed on the outside to stretch the field. And the fastest receiver in this class is Xavier Worthy. So I'm going to give him Xavier Worthy to play third fiddle. Horrible fantasy landing spot, most likely for Xavier Worthy. But this would be a lot of fun. And I think Brock Purdy would have some fun, throwing it downfield to Xavier Worthy. We know what Ayuk can do after the catch if he's still there. We know what Deebo Samuel can do in the short to intermediate game. The one piece of your offense that you actually don't have is a guy that's a pure deep threat.
Yeah, no, I wouldn't have gone that direction. I think you need to shore up the right side of the offensive line because outside of Trent Williams, it's kind of been a mess. And not to mention the one area of weakness on their defense has been the outside passing game. So I think another corner would be a fit. But like you mentioned,
obviously that would be probably what they would do. But I think I'm having fun with this one. And also,
I respect it.
Second and third and fourth round of the draft, you got free agency. You could address a corner in free agency, address the offensive line in free agency. in my opinion, would just be kind of like a best player available situation. Now, I don't know if the NFL is going to view Xavier Worthy as a first round pick, but if he runs in the 4.2s, and I saw what he did at Texas for 3 years, man. Like, the guy can play, he can run routes. He's Marquise Brown-esque, and Marquise Brown was a first round pick, and I think he's faster than Marquise Brown.
But we're back on the clock here. 32nd overall pick, aka by this sim, the Super Bowl champion here with the Baltimore Ravens. And I just don't see him not going in the first round, so I will take him here. Again, there's going to be people arguing, well, they have Odafe Owe, they have, Jadeveon Clowney, they have David Ojabo, they have a lot of edge rush talent. But what we know about the Baltimore Ravens is just because they have an abundance at a position doesn't mean that they'll pass on a blue chip talent. And I do think Chop Robinson represents a blue chip talent. Big size, awesome traits, going to run probably in the 4.4s at his size, a 260-pounder running in the 4.4s. I mean, I don't know what Penn State feeds their defensive linemen, but they're always the freakiest players in the NFL draft, evidenced by Odafe Owe, evidenced by Micah Parsons, evidenced by numerous players in the past. So with Chop Robinson, again, this is a guy that we've been hearing talked about in the top 15, top 20 of the NFL draft for so long. I don't know why now he's projected to go 46th, but I don't think a guy with his traits will fall out of the first round. So I will close off the NFL draft with him going at 32.
Yeah, and Baltimore also very notorious for taking best player available that's sliding, hence why Kyle Hamilton is a Baltimore Raven, for example. He was the guy that was sliding in that draft because he tested poorly, and the Ravens were like, his tape is top 10, and we're going to get him at wherever they picked him, like 16 or 17 or wherever they drafted him at. That makes some sense for Baltimore. So you guys can see the full first-round mock. Again, let us know what you disagree with. Let us know what you agree with. 49ers fans and Steelers fans probably won't be too happy with me giving them Michael Penix and Xavier Worthy respectively, but we had a little bit of fun with this. And again, it's January, man. Like, none of this stuff matters right now. Realistically, we're talking about hypothetical situations. We don't know who the coaches of some of these teams are. We don't know what they're going to like schematically and all that kind of stuff. And we still have free agency and rounds 2 to 7 of the NFL draft if we didn't fill whatever particular need you think is the absolute must grab for your favorite NFL team. So let us know what you think in the comments. Leave a like down below if you enjoyed. Subscribe if you guys are new around here. I know NFL mock drafts, sometimes you guys aren't like fantasy bros that are finding us, but definitely go and check out some of our other fantasy content as well. If you guys are dynasty players, especially, you're going to want to check that out. So with that being said, peace out, and we'll talk to you soon.